first of all, I want to welcome all of the attendees to this webinar. It's exciting and challenging times for some of us, and that includes joining webinars and attending webinars from home. As we sit in a kind of lockdown or quarantine situation. I want to thank everyone because we're nearly 50 attendees today from across Europe, which is why we'll be doing the session in English today. And the idea is basically to zoom in on employee communications and very specifically to deep dive into a case study with Luc van Moorseke. Luc is the CEO of vulpia, and vulpia runs more than 40 elderly homes in Belgium. So it's a very specific case within the healthcare branch. Obviously, one of the industries, one of the sectors that is heavily impacted by Corona these days, and where they have a very specific approach in terms of making sure the right measures are communicated, making sure they're communicated timely and repetitively, and now getting into a situation where obviously things are more or less stabilizing, but we need to keep people engaged, keep people motivated. So that's precisely what Luc will be talking about. In terms of our agenda, I'll kick things off very briefly, and I don't want to talk about Spencer too much. If there are any questions about the product in and of itself, I suggest we take them offline. What I do want to share is a number of best practices that we've seen across our customer base. And then I want to hand things over to Luc to basically share how they've approached essentially this COVID crisis from the emerging situation into where we are right now. The idea is towards the end of the session that we take Q&A from the audience. So basically at the bottom of your screen, there should be a button called Q&A. If you open that one up, you can raise questions. We'll make sure to answer all of the questions that are handled today. Either we'll tackle them live throughout this session, or we will take them offline, and then Luc or myself will get back to you afterwards with the responses. So that's about it. I think we'll be running the session for roughly 30 minutes into 45 minutes as needed. So not to keep you guys too long and essentially make the most of this webinar. So what I briefly want to share is some of the best practices. What we do with Spencer is we basically offer companies a communication platform that helps them to reach their entire audience. Essentially for us, that's the initial building block. It's making sure that you are relevant to your audience so you can reach not only your typical digitally enabled employees, but also the blue collars or the workers, or in this case, people in healthcare, essentially creating that type of channel. And then leveraging that channel to indeed enter into a conversation with the right person, with the right tone of voice, and with the right message at the right time. So there's a degree or a very intensive segmentation and targeting engine that is part of the product to basically make sure you can target the right audience with the right message, and then ultimately measure the impact, and not just in a quantitative fashion. So not just is my message read and is it delivered, but ultimately also in a qualitative fashion in terms of what do my employees feel, what do they think about this, and basically do that with pulse checks, either in context with a message or with a very brief engagement survey that you might want to run for specific audiences throughout time and on potentially a regular interval. So I'll leave it at that, but that's basically the platform. That's what we do for over 100,000 employees worldwide these days. And so it's basically the learnings from how our customers are using this digital platform that we've analyzed, and that's what I want to share with you briefly. And I've already seen a first question coming in. So indeed, we will be sharing the slides after the session with all of the attendees. So you're welcome to take note. We'll also be recording that session. So you'll have both the materials available as well as the recorded session of this webinar. Basically, what triggered us was an investigation or a research paper by Edelman, and Edelman is a worldwide communications agency. And basically what they indicated, and I think this is something we can all relate to, is that more than 50% of employees have difficulty identifying what information is reliable and what information is not. Because we get messages on WhatsApp, we get things on social media, we see things in the news, we read things in the newspaper, and obviously there's the employer communication. So what they basically analyzed is what do employees consider the most reliable source of information, and ultimately it's their employer, right? They feel that their employer is the most reliable source of information to basically stay up to speed throughout this crisis and ensure that they are taking the right measures and taking the right steps. And that triggered us basically to analyze how our customers, in this case, are using that employee communication channel, how they're using that to talk about COVID. And we saw, and I think this is actually underestimated because we made this graph somewhere mid-March, we saw a huge spike in terms of communication that is now talking about COVID. You'll see it's nearly 10 to 15% of all of the messages, and I think it's even increased over time. So we started analyzing what are the most impactful messages that our customers are basically sharing with their employees, right? What are the articles or the content items that our employees or their employees basically read the most? What are the most impactful elements, and what are the tactics behind those? And we basically distilled kind of 5 best practices. And the very first one is the messages that got the highest level of traction are those where the companies were proactive, where they were basically taking specific measures or essentially defining a number of next steps, even before they were mandatory, before they were enforced by the government. I'm thinking of companies, for example, shutting down their offices and shifting into home working and teleworking, even before it became an official recommendation. I'm thinking also of customers in the healthcare branch or in the retail branch that started taking very specific measures and communicate very early on about hygiene guidelines and about quality guidelines when they're dealing with food, for example. The second thing is that, and those were actually the most impactful communications, they're those that really followed closely after government announcements. So when the government essentially shared the specific measures that they announced and that they enforced for specific audiences and for specific companies or industries, that message being translated into what are we doing as an organization was very often the most impactful type of communication. And the closer you could follow from that government announcement to actually communicating it to your audience, the higher the impact. The second big best practice that we noticed in terms of getting traction was essentially to contextualize your guidance. I've seen customers who specifically targeted people who indeed have a caring responsibility for elder, for example, or people who were dealing with food, or specifically for audiences that travel very regularly. And so they gave very specific guidance on top of the overall guidance. They gave more contextual guidance to specific audiences within the company. And that's essentially, that taps into what we expect from you, right? It's really kind of stimulating that ownership and stimulating that type of, this is how we'll get through this as a company, and you specifically need to make sure that you pay attention to X, Y, or Z. A next big element that we've identified as kind of a best practice is the consistency and the repetition, right? Making sure that you're basically repeating what was already announced and then reiterating those measures and then adding what's new. Because very often the proactive companies, right, those who started taking measures earlier on, they maintained these measures and they really repeated them over and over again. That's also something that's coming back from the Edelman research, is that in a lot of cases, you need to hear things a couple of times before they start to sink in. So that was one of the essential tactics as well. And then we've also seen customers being very successful in creating kind of a routine in terms of how they communicate. So for example, we see companies right now that communicate every other day to give a Corona update. And in some cases, there's limited to no actual novelties, but they still keep that cadence, that reassurance, making sure that they create that trust for their employees. Very similarly, we see a couple of companies that are also indicating when they will communicate next. So essentially, they're aware of the fact that there's government announcements coming, right? In Belgium, for example, we will probably have more announcements later today. So they already communicate about the fact that, you know, they will give an update, for example, tomorrow morning or tonight at 8 o'clock, for example, to again make sure that, you know, demonstrating that they're on top of things, demonstrating that they are you know, reliable and trustworthy in this context. Oops. Next two elements, basically making sure that you reach and you have the maximum impact, right? We typically recommended all of our customers to leverage all of the channels that they had, right? It's important to reach 100% of your audience. In some cases, you know, our customers have 100% reach on Spencer. In some cases, they complemented this with posters. They complemented it with, you know, newsletters. In some cases, they complemented it with text messages. But ultimately, make sure that you get your message across. But then secondly, making sure that the full catalog, the consistent information that you have to offer is basically consolidated in one place, to make sure that there's always that point of reference. And so for many of our customers, that one place was indeed Spencer as a destination. And then lastly, and I think essential in terms of the format used for communication, is making sure that the guidelines are clear, right? Work with bullet lists, work with infographics, work with visuals, work with videos. Those were very often the most impactful types of communication, again, to make sure that we were indeed, you know, getting that message across. And then lastly, and some customers do this more than others, but it's something that I deeply appreciated, is in every single message. For example, at Vulpia, there's messages around, you know, stay safe, stay strong, let's do this for our community. So there's really that human touch in the way you communicate. It's not just about articulating the measures, it's also recognizing that your people are in a situation with a degree of uncertainty, with potentially risks for their own health, and basically recognizing that and dealing with that in a very human fashion. So I've given you a very brief walkthrough. We've got this entire analysis in terms of the most impactful communication types across our customer base, documented in basically a blog post, which you can find on www.spencer.co/resources. And essentially the fact that while we were analyzing the customers that stood out, right, with their communication tactics, we basically thought, let's give them the stage, right? I mean, we can share as much as we want, but ultimately it's how they are dealing with this crisis that is the most interesting, and that is potentially relevant to some of you in the audience as well. So we basically started kicking off a series of webinars, and today is the first one where we'll have Luc taking the stage in a couple of seconds. Next week we will have a very similar webinar, but in this case with a retail case study. So Laura will be talking about how they are dealing with the corona crisis or COVID at Deleuze, which is one of the largest retailers in Belgium. And then on the 10th of April, we'll actually have two communication consultants from Acanto coming over. One of them is specialized actually in crisis communication, that's Julien, and Avi is specialized in strategy communication around engagement, motivation, etc., which is now becoming more important as we start to kind of settle into this new situation, but a difficult situation for many of us. So on that note, Luc, I want to transfer it to you. I sincerely want to thank you for carving out the time. I know it's a very busy and hectic period for you guys at Vulpia. You know, you're active in healthcare, so I sincerely also want to extend my thanks to everything that you are doing and some of the members of the audience in terms of, I would almost say, keeping society afloat and keeping those at risk in a safe situation with you and your employees and your organization. So on that note, Luc, the floor is yours to share a little bit about how you've dealt with this situation.
Thank you, Martin, for giving me this opportunity. As you say, it's a bit special nowadays to run a company as ours. Luckily, we have well-trained teams, very motivated employees who are day after day doing their utmost best to counter this crisis, to deal with it. And it's very important to keep the morale of our people in the best possible condition, because it's heavy. It's heavy because there is no communication possible in a direct way, let's say visits to our elderly care centers of the family, which means there's a high pressure upon our residents because they're out of direct contact with their relatives, which is probably the most important thing we can offer for them. We cannot do it anymore. Luckily, we have other means of communication through and with resident and family. And luckily for us, we ran into your company a few months ago, and we started a project which in the very beginning was called My Vulpia. But with great pleasure, we accepted to name it Spencer after a small battle we had. But we're very lucky now we took that decision, and we're very, very lucky and happy that we're collaborating with Spencer in these times. So maybe we can start to run through the slides of Vulpia.
Absolutely.
To give some canvas to our discussion. Who we are is clearly, you already announced it, we are active in Belgium and not Belgium only, within 41 centers, as well in Flanders, Wallonie, as in Brussels. A part of them which we constructed ourselves, nearly half of them. Some of them we acquired. Some of them we developed in co-development. And actually we run about 4,000 beds, of which the biggest part, high care beds, 75%. We do that with 2,400 employees, and we also service about 600 apartments, well known as service flats. When we go to the next slide, you can see that we have about 1,600 what we call rust- en verzorgingstehuisbedden, so high care, which is a bit more, let's say, financed by the government. 2,300 normal care beds, short stay about 100, recovery after hospitalization mainly about 70, and senior living 820.
Which means that you're currently caring for roughly 5,000 elderly, right? About
and about, yes. So here we have a bit of the chart of Belgium to see where we are. We grouped our care centers into 4 clusters, and each cluster is run by a cluster manager. Because the span of control, we considered about 10 to 15 care centers. So for the moment, it's about 10 they take care of. And we are lucky we are not about the number of 15 to 20, which you see in some of the other countries, like France. The average of a cluster is between 15 and 20, 25, which is a big challenge now. So in these times, we are lucky we have the small clusters of 10, so we're very close to the directors of the centers. We now and then have discussions with the board that financially this is maybe not the best possible way of seeing things, but in Corona times it's an advantage. So how did we try to give response to this crisis? We immediately elaborated what we call the COVID-19 management team, the crisis team, to deal with all of the emergencies which appear all over the group, and with all of the information coming to us from the governments. And as we are a regionalized country, we have now and then we have the federal level, we have the Flemish, the Brussels, the Wallonie level, and which in the very beginning was not uniform and is not yet, but more and more, luckily. So we have two levels of managing the crisis. It is the Corona Crisis Management Team, which I run, and in which we have close collaboration with what we call the care coordinators, who are supporting the care centers in a direct way, which we deployed as from 2019. And we are very happy we took that decision. It's like gold value in these times that we have those people close to the operations and well trained, who coordinate, let's say, everything that has to do with interpretation of what we get as from information to the floor and what we see on the floor to bring it to the team. So there mainly we coordinate every info coming from government or coming from the floor, and we deal with it. On a very regular basis. We do that on Monday, on Wednesday, and on Friday. We have a call in the morning to coordinate every action necessary. And beside of that, normally we have executive committee twice a month. Now we have it twice a week. We do that on Tuesday and Thursday to be sure that at the level of direction, every action can be taken immediately and supported, and giving all the support to the crisis team in a continuous way. So this is the way we organized ourselves to deal with this crisis.
Nice.
So maybe we can move to the next slide. What are the challenges? We have challenges, I think, at 4 levels: authorities, resident and family, staff, and image. I already discussed a little bit about staff and family. There is a high work pressure. We already have, in normal days, high pressure because we are in very high care. About between 75 and 80% of the residents within the vulpia group is very dependent on the level of care. So in these days, with an extra impact from Corona, I can say it's heavy to deal with that. We have the geographical spread. Okay, we have as an impact of Corona the insecurity, which you can see more in certain centers and more in certain regions, which also has to do with the cultural aspects. I'd say in Brussels, we have a large African community working for us, who have in their memory the Ebola crisis, and for them it's particularly difficult to stay motivated to take care of the people because they're afraid of the possible impact. So we have to do special efforts there. And yes, there is a high need of clear, consistent communication, because if not, you get too many interpretations of the information given by the government. So really strongly focus on that to give clear communication, clear instructions, how to deal with it and how to interpret it. On the hand of the resident, they're largely isolated as from the moment they cannot receive any visit, so which is difficult. So we try to offer them one-to-one communication by telephone, tablet, Skype, to keep them connected with the outside world. And as well for the staff, even more for the resident and their family, there's the big insecurity. What's going to happen to my father? What's going to happen to me? And what's going to be the impact? On the level of authorities, we have the daily updates of the guidelines. In the beginning, they really changed a lot. So we had to adapt our instructions on a daily basis, which was heavy. But luckily we managed to do it. Sometimes it's complex, and it has to be interpreted in simple instructions to the floor. But okay, there we took the decision to get one guy, Walter, within our group to be the contact person with the authorities. So we started immediately a direct line with the authorities to ask questions, to ask for information, to clear out some uncertainties. And really, it worked well. So as we are dealing with a complex situation in a complex country, nevertheless, the collaboration with the authorities was very, very well. So we often in this country have lack of our authorities. In this crisis, we can only say, as from vulpia, we had a great collaboration with the administration of the different regions, which is very positive to see that in a crisis as this can be done. And as from the image, we often are in a negative way in the media. This is great that in these times there is positive communication, or a lot of positive communication, also a lot of support coming through our employees, which is very good for the morale, that there's a support, let's say, in the larger community for the work done or being done on a daily basis. So we have a kind of cascade. We try to bring all those messages in a way which is clear, gathering information from and through the crisis team is through WhatsApp. We have two groups, two mini groups, which is Corona communication and which is direction communication. We have calls, we have emails, and we have every now and then a face-to-face, which we really need. And luckily we could bring in Spencer as an add-on to the briefing. We have, let's say, the daily briefing. We have the newsletter, which we send to the care center at a fixed time. The direction of the care center brings this information to the team through briefings, but we put it also on Spencer. So there our employees have the possibility, when they're at home, when there's less pressure on them from the workload, they can look at it again and get a second interpretation of the information. So yeah. Helga, which is my communication manager, put it in a big green because really it was major for us to be able to use it, to be sure that we could bring it on a daily basis to the troops.
All right.
Yeah, the timeline, it's a bit of a recap how we did it. Huh? We had the first signals, things were coming on. We tightened up the guidelines. We tried to give a lot of context in a general way, because it was not clear yet what was going to be the impact, what we were going to do. So we immediately started to gather some general information and started to distribute it to our teams. Then on a repeated basis, we got as the measurements from the governments started to come to us, we started to interpret them and brought them in what we called the coronavirus update newsletter. So every member could stay informed on a daily basis of the new instructions, because as I already told, they changed a lot in the beginning. And then you have the other decisions taken at a certain moment in time. We got the closure of our centers for visitors, it was very important to be able to communicate that in an immediate way, because it was decision taken, and you had to start doing it. So we used it to bring a bigger communication, and also to make it clear for the visitors. Unfortunately, we cannot do in another way. This is what we have to do. And as you told also, repeat, repeat, repeat. The way we use at these times, Spencer, is to repeat the message and to bring it clear through the Corona update on a daily or every 2 days. We try to do it now every 2 days, because daily it was a lot for the people to deal with, as it is stabilizing the information, as the way of dealing with the crisis by the vision of the government is now clear. We try to do it on a 2 daily basis. On the other hand, we also use it to support our people and to bring positive messages. So we have, on the one hand side, the information which they need to have, the instructions, the working instructions, but also the motivation of the team, which is at certain moments in time as important or even more important, to bring also within all the news which is negative, and instructions and let's say directive, to be supportive. We have the daily applause for the care people, which we try to bring, and which is supported through the direction and through our marketing and communication manager, who tries to bring it as often as possible. And also a lot of actions taken by people in our surroundings. We share it with our teams and the members of the teams. We were offered flowers, we were offered pancakes, a lot of things, but also through partnerships, we were offered material, which is important. And as the uncertainty which we spoke about every now and then appears, we try to inform them about what we have in terms of materials at their disposition, because that's important to not become uncertain. We have only a small amount of these things. No, at the group level, we can reassure you, we have it. When you need, we'll bring it to you. So there's the positive things of giving support to the troop. Yeah, I think this is the internal versus the outside world. We try to the outside world. We try to use the website, Facebook, and some community platforms. We have the more direct way, which is the old-fashioned way, by phone. We have an IPTV network in some of our care centers, which we can use to bring messages to the screen, so directly impact and visible for the resident in their room. We started to use Teams, WhatsApp, and already the more clearly email. We started a corporate newsletter, and we started to use in a strong way LinkedIn. The corporate newsletter, some of our major stakeholders also need or want to know how is the group dealing with this crisis, what's the impact on the crisis. We have, let's say, the real estate investors or bankers, but also the board of directors. They want to know what's happening with the group. And so we took the initiative of making a corporate newsletter, which we distribute on Tuesday and Friday, which gives let's say, the high-level info about the impact on the group at the level of the employees and at the level of the residents, which makes that we don't have to communicate too much in a one-to-one, but we can do it in a streamlined way. And yeah, to the employee, and this starts to feel like a publicity for your company and for your tool, but really Spencer is in the center of the employee communication. Email is the transfer of info which is done, but the packaging, the wrapping, which we do through or to the employee is Spencer at these moments.
What I think is interesting, Luc, and that's just my observation. I think what's missing, because we're talking in English, is the fact that you literally call every elderly care center a home. That always struck me, as it gives an indication as to how you look at the way you run the business, basically. And I think what's interesting as well, when I look at the presentation, and this is new to me as well, is the combination of what we typically tend to call your leadership cascade, right? How you deal with the directors of the homes and how you basically capture their feedback, how you brief them and allow them to then brief their personnel. And then secondly, establishing that direct channel to basically complement. So you have both the digital information as well as the human touch. And I think, in every company, that's essentially, a very viable and powerful combination. How, and that's a personal question on my side, how important is that leadership cascade and the fact that the director of a home is with their people and basically shares those messages, shares those measures, and essentially establishes that kind of motivation and relationship. How would you value that, and how would you nurture it?
Major. So I value that major. We see nowadays that leadership shown to the teams and to the collaborators, to the employees in the center is of the highest importance. That's the reason why we try to give, as a committee of directors, the maximum support to the managers of the centers, because they are in the front line. They are there with their employees, and their leadership capacities, being there for their people, giving them the right instructions at the right moment in time, and be supportive for them is major. Really, and I knock on wood, in nearly all of our centers, there's a big calm. Even the centers, some of the centers impacted in an important way. We see that the morale of the people, we can see it through the pictures they send, is still positive, or as positive as possible. And this is really due to the leadership capacity of the manager of the center. Yep. We are like a multi-plant organization, and we depend on the leadership capacities of those people and their capacity of motivating the people. You have the training on the job, you have to give the instructions, that's true, and you need, let's say, the right people to do that job, the qualifications, but they are there. The difference you make nowadays is through the motivation you can bring to them, and being there as a leader and be supportive. So what I see on the level of HQ, normally we're there doing the job, and a lot of people in finance, administration, personnel, they're doing the thing in a quite normal way. What we try to do is to give them an extra motivation to be extra supportive, and really they're doing a great job also on that level, thanks to our HR people, thanks to our CFO, who really dealt in a great way with her troops, thanks to our facility manager, who reorganized himself. We are, I think, and this is a little bit crazy, thanks to the crisis, we are more supportive than we were before. And being supportive on the level of HQ lifts the manager of the center, or gives him a feeling, okay, I'm not here by myself, I'm being supported, and motivates him to support his team. So this is really an impact we can see.
Yeah, well, I think that you've more or less answered the questions I got from the audience in terms of what is the sentiment right now within the organization, right? As we've gone through kind of the spike, I would say, in terms of measures taking and getting into a more stable situation. And in that more stable situation, which was the second question, what is how do you, or what tactics do you deploy to actually, instill that motivation?
We try to inform them as maximum as possible on all the actions we take. We have undertaken actions to find temporary employees through Facebook. A lot of students, or all of the students, are at home. Also, the students in the care direction. So we try to reach them through those actions to come and join us on a temporary basis to be at the disposition of the care centers wherever necessary. We have a lot of people who on a voluntary basis come and give support in the houses. We have the Red Cross Flanders, who really did a great action, and I think we have about 20 of their people working for us now, giving support to the teams. So all of those small things, you can do for them are signals of support, is being supportive as maximum as possible. Whether it is on the medical side to give them all the materials they need, whether it is on the human side. So we work on, let's say, we try to work on the morale, on the health, and on the workload.
Yep.
The morale through the messaging, to be supportive, the health to really take all of the measurements necessary and to really look on it that they're done in the right way, and the workload we try to differentiate whenever necessary and to interfere and to bring extra people if we can find them. But we covered it. Our COO, together with the responsible of care, have made a dashboard so we can see in a one-on-one pager all of the important functions within a care center for the whole group. And whenever one of the functions is out, we really make a zoom in and we see, okay, do we need to do something or not? And we have, let's say, identified a few scenarios, and depending to the scenario, to the impact on the house, we immediately interfere or, let's say, at a less basis.
Okay, interesting. Another question I got from the audience is the time it takes to actually roll out specific measures within the community, basically, from actually being briefed or making a decision to getting the action rolled out and implemented on the floor, and then perhaps even sustaining and measuring that the measures are indeed being taken.
Yeah. Every information that reaches us latest 10:30 every day is distributed at between 1300 and 1400, between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So on a daily basis, the new information was distributed and communicated to the employees. And then we have the care team, which monitors the centers to see whether it's what is well understood and whether it is brought into practice. So it's on a, let's say, within a few hours, it's brought to and deployed in the centers.
Yeah, makes sense. I also received a question in terms of what are the other elements that are used or that are available in Spencer within vulpia, so I can perhaps take a first step and look add to it if you feel required. But I think indeed at vulpia the main focus is internal communication. There's also an aspect of retrieving colleagues and finding their contact details to basically make sure you can liaise with one another more quickly. It's also about retrieving links to other sources of information, other tools. And I think an aspect that we haven't really touched upon, Luc, and I'm not sure how and if it's being used in the context of Corona right now, but there's actually also an internal WhatsApp that is available within Spencer for vulpia. And where basically the personnel of a house can also interact. I'm not sure if these communities also play a role at this point.
we hope to deploy that more and more in the future. Our focus is not on that at this moment in time. As you know, we organized Spencer in a matrix structure. We will for sure more and more in the future do direct communications to certain groups of people over the centers or to a center. So we can use Spencer in general communication, we can use it to communicate to a center, or we can use to communicate to certain functions, let's say kitchen, cleaning, care. As this moment in time, it's mainly used for general communication because, yeah, it is a crisis situation and there is no time to differentiate. What we are going to start to do as from today, and even more on Monday, is to start to distribute small films because until now, we mainly distributed communication, text, but instructions brought into practice with small video is we hope and we are sure that it will bring, even in a more direct and in a more easy way, the instructions to the employees. So we are gathering it as we are speaking. We started to do that a few days ago, and I had a call before we had this webinar. They're going to start the distribution of that normally this afternoon. So we are going to use Spencer to bring instruction videos to the employees.
Yeah,
but
I can
yeah, sure, Spencer has much more possibilities than what we use at this moment in time. We were preparing all of those things, but the crisis hit us, and we were lucky to have it to do the distribution of the communication, the intra-troop communication. I think now it's a bit blown away by the Corona crisis.
Yeah, understood. And I think that makes sense. I can indeed only recommend that, you know, the targeting content to specific target audiences will indeed maximize your impact, and as will, I believe, visuals and video, etc.
Yep.
But obviously these elements also take time. So I perfectly understand that you, especially in this kind of coordinated crisis, or a crisis where you need strong coordination, it really is top-down communication, essentially, to make sure that the instructions are getting to the right people with the right pace and at the right time.
We also added a lot of other things in the Spencer app, like certain benefits at work and others which we offer to the employees. We use Spencer. Before it was like an isolated thing. Now it's integrated into Spencer. In the future, asking for a day off, asking for holidays, we will do it through Spencer. We already distribute partly the salary forms through Spencer. We made the link with SD Works. So for us, we are only at the beginning of the use of Spencer. It will be strategically, we consider it as an important tool to reach our employees in a direct way. When we were, let's say, the vulpia 10 years ago, we could communicate easily directly to our employees because we were small and we could be there whenever we wanted. As we became a larger company, we were looking for tools to get in a direct way to the employee, and that's what we are going to use Spencer for in the near future more and more. For us, we're only at the beginning.
Yep, excellent. I've got a couple more questions from the group. I suggest we take two more and then wrap things up, because we are reaching or approaching that 1 hour time slot that we had planned. Is there any bottom-up feedback mechanism? So how does the personnel from the field actually, how do you take the pulse of those employees, and how do they feed things back into the organization, or perhaps to the centralized HQ teams?
Yeah, everybody knows, because you can give the organogram in the Spencer app what his position is, who to communicate to, for what. We're going to clear that out even more in the future. We were we were in the preparation status. As you know, we only deployed Spencer a few weeks ago. We are really at the beginning of those things. So we started to communicate to the employees in the way they can use it, what they can do with it. Yeah, we were just distributing the app to our personnel as we were hit by the crisis. Is this something we're going to use it for? Yes, because we really are looking for that bottom-up communication. We want to know what they are dealing with, how they see it, what they want us to put a focus on. But once again, we just started and we got impacted by.
So I guess the reality is that today it's basically the reverse of your leadership cascade that takes the pulse of people and basically make sure they're dealing with the situation properly.
But which is not the main goal of the tool. It's reverse. We really want to know what they are dealing with and what they expect us to do with that information.
Absolutely. Just to clarify for the audience, so indeed, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Luc, the deployment of or the launch of Spencer at Vulpia really only took place in beginning of February. So starting that entire launch and onboarding campaign. And then indeed, Corona struck quite quickly, and the entire focus, I think, of both teams shifted into making sure that that direct communication channel to employees was maximized, as that was the need at this point in time. A very interesting question, one that intrigued me as well, is do you take specific measures and do you communicate specifically about the fact that your people are actually at risk in some way, shape, or form, because they are indeed heading to work into an elderly care home where people might be infected. So there's a higher degree of exposure than us working from home, essentially. How do you deal with that, and how do you ensure trust and trustworthiness in that context?
Yeah, some people in a natural way have it less difficult to deal with that than others. We now started to identify those people. We try to group, let's say, the corona impacted residents under suspicion or positive. We're trying to group them more and more, and we will ask, and we are asking to the staff who wants to be at those places, at those departments in our care centers, because some of them really, by nature, feel they have to give care to those people, and they really want to do it. We give them all the protection they need. So it's very important for us as an employer to bring all the tools. That's what we try to do. And it's not easy because some of the things we cannot find them in the market. You all heard it on the news. Even for the simple masks, at a certain moment in time, it was very difficult. I knock on wood. As we are speaking, we were not yet in a position we could not offer the protection tools to the staff, and I hope it will never happen. But we try to be prepared, but when the impact would be major, we will have to deal with it at that moment in time. But to get back to your question, we try to identify those people who really are not negative towards it, and let them deal those people who really want to do it. Because I think if you protect yourself well, it's a way of dealing with something. You see it in the care centers, you see it in the hospitals. We have a lot of professional people who really have a mission. Their personal mission is to give care. And it's beautiful to see how they really want to do that for those people.
Yep. On a closing note, and I commented on that on LinkedIn as well. I saw the quick basically the video shoot that was done by Corona 20, which is a television show here in Belgium on Vier, where I saw a number of vulpia employees actually working outside of their shift to produce additional mouth masks to protect their colleagues. I think that shows the mission, the heart that they put in basically getting through this crisis and making sure that they basically take good care of our elderly people. So to me, that was an indication of indeed the type of DNA and the type of company culture that you're trying to establish.
Mm-hmm.
On that note, Luc, I'm not sure if you have any closing remarks for the audience, things that we didn't touch upon. If not, I suggest we start wrapping up.
Yeah, one thing, a great thank to all the people who do the very small things like offering an applause, offering a pancake, being supportive. Nowadays, being able to receive those things, those messages, is important because I talked about it before. When we can keep the morale positive, it's a lot. It's a lot. And what we see in these days is there's a lot of really collaboration. There's great cohesion forming between the caregivers and the external community, which was not there before, because it was very often in a negative way. It costs a lot of money, they don't take care of us, what do they do? A lot of scandal, which was in the media. I think it's very important now for the people working in this sector that they're regarded with some respect, and I think they were worth of it already before, but now they can get it. And thanks for all of that.
Yep, absolutely agree. More than welcome. You know, we applaud every night with my kids, so we'll keep on doing that for everyone in healthcare. And I know there's some in the audience as well. So thank you very much, Luc, again for attending this session, for sharing your expertise and your experience and the way you've basically ran this, both coordinated within the HQ and basically translated into your organization, both for your employees as well as for the residents, because that's indeed another dimension, obviously very important in your branch. For everyone else on the call, I kindly invite you to have a look at the agenda for our next sessions. We've got a next one coming up next Friday with one of Belgium's larger retailers, with Deleuze, where the internal communications director will take the floor. And then another one coming up with communication experts on the 10th of April. On that note, we will be sharing the materials and the video recording. Should you have any questions when you digest this or when you basically run through the session once more, feel free to reach out. My coordinates are on the slide and will be part of the slideshow that we are sharing with you guys. Thanks again, Luc. All the best with what comes next. I sincerely hope that you know, the stabilization we're seeing continues and that we can get out of this situation. And in the meanwhile, keep doing what you're doing, because honestly, it's impressive, and I think it's worthwhile that you're getting the recognition for it that it deserves.
Thank you for offering me this possibility of bringing into attention what our people do every day. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, everyone.